Hello and welcome back, everyone. We're going to get started. It is promptly 1300 Pacific Standard Time. We're excited to have you here for the EOC and GovOps Readiness series. This is actually session number 4, so that's a little typo on our intro slide. Sorry about that, everyone. Today, we're excited to be covering networking and relationships. Our guest speaker is going to be Nadine McCrindle. She's going to be presenting today, and we couldn't be more excited to have her. We're also going to hear a Red Cross story from a guest speaker later in this series. But first, we're going to start off by covering some of the very important feedback that we have received from all of you who have been participating in this series and joining us each week. And we could not be more thrilled with the responses we've been receiving. So rather than me taking the time to read through this line by line, we're all gonna take a break for 30 seconds and read through the slides so you can see some of the feedback that's been coming in. My hope is that this will spark some interest and maybe generate some questions for you or spark some ideas of some things that you would like further feedback on or things you would like us to cover in this series, because again, this is all about you. So I'm going to set my timer for 30 seconds. Please take a few moments just to read through this and consider what other people have already shared. So I am receiving some feedback that some of you are not seeing anything on your screen. Can everyone else see the screen, or can most people see the screens?
Yes. Screen share.
Yes. Okay. So
I just see the survey form, that's all.
What is that?
The survey form feedback, session 1, your slide number 2 is all I see.
Okay, that's what you should be seeing. Perfect. So Lauren, I'll be sure that you get a copy of the slide deck and can see that going forward. So with that, we're going to move on to the next slide, which is continued feedback. Like I said, this is just from session 1. We've received a ton of great feedback. I want you guys to take a few seconds again to read through this slide as opposed to me reading it to you verbatim, just because I think you'll absorb it better. But it is important. This is all the type of feedback that can make this series more beneficial for all of the participants. So the more you engage with us, the better it can be for you. So again, this one's a little bit longer, so we're going to take about 40 seconds to review this slide. That may not have been ample time for all of you to read through the feedback, but what's important is that you note and understand what type of feedback we're getting so far, because it's my hope that it'll generate some questions and bring up more things that you'd like to see so you can share with us in future survey forms, which we'll be sending another one out following this session. So these are the questions that were asked following session 1 that have been added to a Q&A portion of a reference guide that we're creating. And we'll share with you after this session in the email. Let's review these questions together, and you can refer again to the Q&A answers that we provide in the reference guide. So first, what is the specific name of the toolkit we can use for reference? I just answered that in that we're going to be calling it a reference guide. And we'll be sharing that in the follow-up email, and we'll also give you links to that and other resources that are available. Who notifies the government entity that you have been assigned? And again, we're not going to go through the answers of these questions. We're going to read through the questions. You can refer to the reference guide for the answers, and we'll be covering many of these topics throughout future sessions in this series. How does the SOC, the California State Operations Center, handle EOC requests? What are common issues? Jurisdiction doesn't see the need, but the Red Cross does. So conflicts of what the need is, the unmet need might be, how can that get resolved between the county and Red Cross without there being a bunch of fireworks? Who monitors, manages the Web EOC requests? Who monitors, manages American Red Cross Pacific Division's mission tracker? And are there Red Cross representatives from all 4 parts of external relations in the EOC for any given disaster? Again, these are all excellent questions, and we're not going to cover the answers today, but we will cover them in future sessions, and you can always refer to the answers in the reference guide. For session 2, Luke took us through what we're striving for in disaster response and the mantra, listen, think, and communicate, and how that applies to our strategizing during disaster response. Via the survey form feedback, we received a request to create a simulation exercise for the end of the series. This is going to be planned by one of the work groups that we're putting together out of these participants in this series. We received a request for actual samples of tools used during disaster responses, like the activities log, the POC workbook. We will share live examples of those. Again, all of these links will be available in that the guide that we're going to be sharing with you of all the resources. So I'll add the link to some of the examples, like I said, in the reference guide. Additionally, we were asked what types of disasters and services CEP can coordinate during steady state with our partners, and what services are readily available to utilize in support of clients right when a disaster gets going. We're going to have a whole session on CEP that will go through many of those answers. And it will also, but I want you, excuse me, you guys. Those are all fantastic requests and questions, and all the types of things, again, we'd like to see coming in on future survey forms. In session 3, we examined arrival to the EOC and strategies to succeed. We continue to update the External Relations Acronym Encyclopedia, and there's going to be a glossary of regularly used terms during a disaster response that we're going to add to that reference guide. We'll also continue to provide links to the templates and online forms. Again, all of those are going to be available in the reference guide that we're going to share with you. So we welcome suggestions for also cool tools and applications that you guys run into that can make our job easier or impress upon our partners that we have and use these tools in order to succeed. So one of the cool tools that was shared with me after session 3 was called Mentimeter, and it's a live polling tool that you can use during presentations, and we'll probably see it in future sessions. I haven't had enough opportunity to play with it to use it this week, but I look forward to it. Again, if you come across tools like that, please share them with the group. We may not use them all universally, but the great thing about tools is that you can use the ones that work well for you and leave the others behind. We do have some templates and some tools that we're expected to use, and we will learn and practice using those tools throughout this series, but don't be shy of new services and new applications that come around, because it can make your job simpler and easier. So some questions that came out of session 3. What are some wraparound services? Good question. This was part of the knowledge check that we did after session 3, and in part of the disaster scenario, it covered or it asked a question about wraparound services. So wraparound services are essentially anything and everything that clients need outside of sheltering. So it's feeding, it's distribution of emergency supplies, It could be if we're taking care of those who are staying at a campground or staying outside in trailers or RVs, the fuel or the pumping of their tanks so that we don't have a mess in the parking lots. Those are all considered wraparound services. The other questions, I'm not going to go through one by one in essence to save time, but they're all going to be covered in that Q&A in the reference guide. So before we move on to our main presentation of topic today, I want to present this slide and this QR code. This QR code, you can hold your phone up to it, scan it, and it should take you directly to the form for you to fill out if you would like to join one of the work groups that we've established. Many of you have already responded. If you have not received an email, but you did respond to a previous survey form, it means that I did not receive your contact information. Please utilize this survey form. Let us know what work group you'd like to participate in, and we'll get you included. You can also use this link if you prefer not to scan the code. So without further ado, I am going to pass the presentation on to our wonder from down under, Miss Nadine McCrindle, who is coming to us live from Bend, Oregon, where she is the Executive Director for American Red Cross. I've spent time working with Nadine in the State Operations Center, representing Red Cross for the state of California, and I have learned so many very cool things from her, mostly regarding relationships and networking, and that is why we asked her to be our expert speaker today. So thank you, Nadine. Please take over. I will stop presenting, and we look forward to hearing what you have for us.
All right. Hi, everyone. An absolute pleasure to be here. As I saw everyone joining the meeting today, I saw some old friends from previous deployments. So hello, old friends. And to those of you that I haven't had the pleasure of working with yet, hello, new friends. I am unable to share my presentation. Sherry. Let me.
No worries, Nadine. I can bring it right up. Just give me one moment.
All right. Thank you.
And we'll start right where we left off.
Thank you.
My pleasure.
Oh, actually, I can navigate forward. Here we go.
There we go.
All right. All right, everyone. So today I'm going to talk about networking and relationships. As I mentioned before, I see some people here that I have worked with before. I love people. I love meeting new people. I love making new friends. And for me, this quote from the Red Cross speaks to me most about the work that we do when we are deployed, and I think even in our everyday blue sky operations. We roll up our sleeves, we open up our hearts, and we are all in terms of fulfilling our mission of preventing and alleviating human suffering. I wanted to share with you today, at the beginning of the presentation, a picture from my first deployment. This is me at the Kincaid Fire, and this is little Manny. Manny and his family were evacuated, and as I said, this is my first deployment, and I had just completed my shelter training. So I was deployed as a shelter SA. I was so excited to be sent down to California, and I arrived at the DR headquarters, and they said, oh, you know, what are you here for? And I said, anything you want me to do. I was so full of enthusiasm that I figured that anything that I lacked in experience, I was going to make up the gap with my enthusiasm. Manny was a wonderful little kid. He ended up following me around the shelter. As I said, him and his siblings were evacuated and they were staying at the shelter. This was a county shelter, and he thought it was hilarious. He would just yell out, boo, behind me, and I would do the fake scare, and he would just crack himself up laughing, and then his big sister worked out that I was kind of a bit of fun, and so she would practice her magic tricks on me and her little card tricks, and we had so much fun, and I got to know Manny and his family, and they're lovely people, and I made it my mission to just really walk around, talk to people, ask them their story, how they were. We were quite fortunate. The communities where these people had been evacuated from, the fire didn't get near, so they were really just waiting for the evacuation orders to be lifted so that they could go home. And I share this story with you because I feel like it was really the beginning of what my work is like when I go and deploy to a disaster. And that is about getting to know the people that I'm helping. And I could have arrived at the county shelter and explained to them the correct way to fill out a registration form and how important it is that people check out when they leave the shelter. I could have sat in the back office and just really been the Red Cross person that was there if they needed me. But I wanted to get to know people. And I think that the people side of the work that we do makes a difference. We don't fight fires. We're not doing debris removal. Our work is all heart. And so in talking about relationships and networking, I feel like the work that we do on the ground and helping people in this way really makes a difference on what that person's experience is when they come into contact with the Red Cross. And so let's now talk about the people that we're working with in perhaps our external relations function, but even more so in our GovOps, specifically at the EOC and at the SOC. We have heard the words acute to chronic for a long time now. No, disasters are more frequent, they're more devastating. And this is really starting to have an effect on our agency partners, if it hasn't already. They're tired, they're overworked, they're exhausted, and they might be a little bit compassion fatigued. They don't get the 7th day off, and they don't get to out-process after 14 days. And I know that even a lot of Red Crosses extended during the disaster season last year, but our agency partners are really feeling it. To give you an example, when I deployed last year to the California wildfires, I went to the State Operations Center, and the team that I was working with were rotating from the COVID response down to their border operation, and then now back to the SOC for the wildfires. It was fortunate while I was there in the beginning, it was the Dixie fire was under a reasonable amount of control. So there wasn't a huge amount of pressure when I first arrived, but you could see that they weren't coming from their usual office in Sacramento to the SOC. These folks were moving around a lot. There was a lot of work that was being done. So in thinking about the environment that we're being deployed to for our agency partners, they're not superhumans, and they're feeling the same fatigue from disasters as what perhaps some of us are. So Luke talked, I think it was about 2 weeks ago now, about the process of listen, think, and communicate. If anyone has ever been in a after action review, the first, second, or third is always communication. You know, what are those things that we can improve upon for the next disaster? And it's all communication in some format is always in there. And it's always about how we collectively as a group should communicate better. And what I want to kind of touch on today, or use this time that we have together, is to talk about how you as an individual can communicate better. And I feel that the more that everyone focuses on their own contribution to the process of communicating, the better we might get at it. So let's talk about when you arrive, you've been deployed, you're all excited, full of enthusiasm like I am, and your first day at your assignment. I would say what's really important is arriving prepared, having your laptop charged, your phone charged, you've got your earbuds and your phone chargers and your laptop charger. If you need extra power adapters, you bring it with you. And you just arrive prepared so that if you are walking into something where you need to be running immediately, that you're ready to do so. Hands out. What this is I will shake someone's hand when I first meet them, and they'll get a hug when I say goodbye. During COVID, of course, it's harder to do this, but I always put my hand out first, and I put myself into the group with introductions first, as opposed to waiting for the group to introduce themselves to me. Always have business cards. If you don't have business cards, try and create an electronic version of it, or just some way to be able to share your information. And collect your team's business cards. One of the things that I always do, because I am terrible with names. I know the next point is remember names, but I'm terrible with names. But what I do is I lay out the business cards that correspond to where those people are located, either in the room with me or in the building, so that I can quickly reference names and get used to using them. Remember names. I try and do it as quickly as I can. I'm terrible. The other thing that I found really handy is when I do meet my group, is that I send a group email. So I've collected everyone's business cards, and we have I have all their contact information, and so I'll send an email to them all saying, you know, how excited I am to be working with them. But really the point of that communication is for me to get my email address into their inbox. And what I find then is that it kickstarts the group communicating with each other. So now we all have one email with everyone's email addresses in there, and it's a way for us to begin communicating. And then the last point I have here is building rapport. I try and find out who my team is. I want to know something about them. Have they got kids? What do they like to do for fun? Where are they from? Where do they live? Where do they go to school? Those types of things, like just get to know your team. The act of talking is quite powerful. But what I find is that how you arrive on the scene really does set the scene and is important in terms of building that team mentality with the people that you're working with. Platinum rule is a new rule that I have heard a number of times now the last couple of years. It's a step above the golden rule, and that is the platinum rule is to treat people how they like to be treated. And I would extend that to communication as well. You know, we have so many ways of communicating now. We have email, we have phone calls, we have text, we have Teams. What I try to do is find out how people prefer to be communicated with, and then stick to it. So if there are people who are not comfortable with, don't like using Teams, which by the way is my preferred way of communicating is Teams, but if they don't, I don't force Teams upon people. If I find people are better at returning text messages than phone calls, I know it's not as professional, but if it feels that need and text messaging is the best way to get communication flowing, then use it, because it's obviously their preferred way of communicating. So really here is about finding how people prefer to be communicated with and then stick to it. Oh, this one's my favourite, closed loop communication. This is where things can go perfectly well or completely fall apart, is this concept of closed loop communication. And the most important part of it is, and if there's nothing that you take away from this whole presentation, it is about acknowledging everything. Even if it's just a simple on it, got it, received, copy, like just some way of responding back to that piece of communication that you have received. It's important to acknowledge it. 2 hours feels like 2 days on an operation. And so it's so important to make sure that if someone is sending you information, especially if it includes a request, is that you acknowledge it. The other part of it is about over communication. It is impossible to over communicate. If we go back to, you know, after action reviews, what's the one thing that we could do better, and it's communication. So we've got to begin over communicating. I don't think we will ever get there, but let's try. But make it easy when you are communicating, and that is, like, if it's urgent, mark it urgent in the subject line. If you're asking them for something, put for action in the subject line. In the body of the email, if you're just forwarding something, put in there FYI for your information, or FYSA for your situational awareness. Make your communication easier to understand. The third point is about communicating early and communicating often. And this is about being aware of the responsibility that you have, especially when you are in an EOC or at a SOC, is that you are going to be made aware of information that the operation doesn't have. And getting that information into the operation as quickly as possible is critical, especially when you think about things like fire activity. If there is a fire that is growing faster than what the crews were originally imagining, or there's weather coming in, like this type of information is really important to share back to the operation. So communicate it early, and if there is more updates, like don't save them all up for the end of the day. Say it as soon as you get it, and then as soon as you get additional updates. The important thing about it, though, is if you need to make sure that information is accurate. And so when you do receive information, just take that extra second to ground it for accuracy, but then communicate it through. The other thing is about do what you say you are going to do. If you commit to something that you're going to follow up with one particular agency and yeah, I'll get that information for you and I'll have it back to you by 2 o'clock, make sure you do that. And that kind of goes into the next point as well about meeting deadlines and updating on progress. If you have been asked to do something and they needed it by 2 p.m, either have it ready by 2 p.m. or update on progress. Acknowledge that we operate in an imperfect world, especially on disaster operations. They're not called disasters for nothing. It's okay to not meet the deadlines, but it's not okay to not let people know that you're not going to be able to. And the most important part about all of this really is about not letting there be any opportunity for any misunderstanding of the situation. Confusion makes disasters worse than what they need to be. And so your role as a communicator, especially in the capacity of government operations, is to make sure that there's no misunderstanding of the situations and that you're always providing clarity with your information and with your communication. This one's an interesting one. I've included this because unless you are really deployed in what is, you know, your blue sky relationship. So quite often we're being deployed to different areas and we might not know the teams that we're going to be working with. So what I wanted to share with you is about knowing your place within that, or within the operation. You're a guest. There are not many other agencies, partners that are going to be working in the State Operations Centre or in an Emergency Operations Centre. We are a guest, and so it's important that we know our place. And so do what you can to find out who is in charge, who is making the decisions, and who does the work. When you find out the lay of the land, then support that structure. So when we're talking about finding out who is in charge, they're the people that you're going to want to give like situational awareness updates to, or information from the operation you're going to be sharing with them. In terms of who makes the decisions, they may not even be in the same building. They may not even be in the same town as where you're deployed. But it's important to know who makes the decisions, because when they ask you for something by 2 o'clock, it's really important that you give them that information by 2 o'clock. And then in terms of who does the work, they're going to be your best partners, because sometimes we're going to be asking them for information, and then sometimes they're going to be asking us for information. And so it's important to be able to support those people and give them the information that they need when they need it. So knowing your place. Okay, let's talk about leaning in. This is another thing that we talk about quite a lot in Red Cross. So leaning in is about asking questions. It's about reading the room and understanding the environment that you're working in. In terms of understanding where the operation is at and what the temperature is like, it's important to be really self-aware. And one way that you can do that is in terms of looking for opportunities to help. Offer your subject matter expertise. For example, the Dixie Fire was in a good spot. Caldor was just starting to behave in a way that was not very nice. And so there were lots of questions about what's our shelter capacity? How many people have we got in them right now? Where can we open shelters? And there were just all of these questions that the state was asking that they just wanted for information to better understand where the operations were going. I took it as an opportunity to share with the team what the process is that we go through to open a shelter. It's not really part of my job, but it was important for them to understand what that process was. And then I also heard that morning in our operations call that we were repositioning shelter teams in the event that the Caldor fire was going to expand its footprint, and we were pre-positioning teams in order to be able to open shelters. This sharing of information, this leaning in and not just sitting back and typing away and doing my work dutifully, builds trust within the team. The temperature dropped, people were a bit more calmer, and we all got we got back to we'll call it a steady state of pace, right? Of just taking care of the job, the task at hand, instead of looking in our crystal balls trying to figure out what was going to happen in the next 24 hours and how the state was then going to respond to it. So we build trust. The other thing is about getting to yes. I feel like this is another one that we try and achieve all the time in getting to yes. And getting to yes doesn't always mean yes that the Red Cross is going to be the one that specifically fulfills that request. But we're often, going back to the subject matter expertise, we're often going to know someone who can if it's not us. But that getting to yes is a really big part of being a good partner and leaning in. So being a good partner is really achieved through honesty, trust, and respect. Now the fun part. I like to have fun when I deploy. It's a really important part of the work that I do because I love people. And I wanted to share with you this, I think it's fun, a day in the life that I had at the SOC. And I arrived, it was my first deployment down to California to work in the SOC. I was a little bit nervous because I was the new girl. I walked in, had my chargers ready, my laptop ready. I had a good idea of what to do. I did the Readiness series last year, so I felt like I had the confidence to be there, but I didn't have the experience. And so in my first day, I walked in, introduced myself to everyone, just as I outlined before, and sat down and did my work, and it was very quiet. No one was talking. Nothing was really happening in terms of the fire scaling up or scaling down. And so I was like, oh, gee, like, what do you do and where are you from? And trying to get to know people, but they were all very quiet. And around noon, half of them disappeared and they came back and complained a little bit about what the lunch was like. And I was like, oh, gee, this is going to be a really long 2 weeks. Everyone sat, they were eating snacks constantly. They were not drinking water. There was coffee cups everywhere. And I was just thinking, wow, I really try to look after myself when I deploy. Like we never drink enough water. We never eat enough food. We definitely don't get enough sleep. But like self-care is one of those things that I personally work really hard at trying to take care of myself when I deploy. So they turned up the second day, same process ensues. And I'm like, oh, gee, I think we need to inject some life in this room. And so I politely asked if I might be able to share a cultural tradition from my home country, Australia, and that is morning tea and afternoon tea. Morning tea is served at 9 a.m. and it typically consists of a cup of tea that's served hot. Milk is optional, with a sweet snack, so a biscuit or a cookie or a piece of cake. So morning tea is at 9 a.m, afternoon tea is at 3 p.m. The idea is that it's a break between breakfast and lunch, and then lunch and dinner. And so the idea of morning and afternoon tea was to try and curb the snacking that was going on in the room. And they thought it was hilarious and kind of cute, and okay, let's give this thing a go. While I had their attention, I said, now let's talk about lunch. What if, because we're making so many decisions throughout the day, we appoint a lunch leader, and the lunch leader is the person who gets all of us up out of our chairs and we walk to the lunch area, and the lunch leader decides how we eat our lunch. Now, by how, I mean, are we having it as a sandwich or are we having it as a salad? Are we having option number 1 or option number 2 for dessert? And it kind of, I know it sounds really quirky, and it was, but it was building teammanship amongst all of us. And so the lunch leader changed every day, and the lunch leader at 11:55, like, okay, everyone, up we get, and we all walk off and we get lunch. And then we ate lunch together outside of the room that we are going to be working in for 12 hours. And off we went and we had lunch together, and it was lovely. And we got to learn more about each other and share stories. Then I implemented a walk, which involved getting up out of your chair and again walking out of the room, but this time not to the snack table or to the coffee bar, but around the building or up the stairs and down the stairs, just some kind of movement so that we weren't just sitting down all day. We also had what's called the dinner roster. And the dinner roster was about, some people lived in Sacramento, some were in hotels like myself. And the dinner roster was, do you have first dinner and then go home or back to your hotel and have second dinner, or you're just having dinner at the SOC. And so the dinner roster was the first person who walked past the menu, knew what we were having, and reported it back to the team so that we could decide on first and second dinners. So all of this, I think all in all, might sound a bit silly, but during that time, no deadlines were missed. No one shirked on their responsibilities. We shared more information than ever, because while we're quick to have a bit of a laugh, if someone needed something, because we were a team, that information was very, very important. We made sure that if we promised something by a particular time, that we shared it. We didn't let each other down because we're a team. It got to the point that the SOC director would kind of come into our room and go, what is going on in here? You guys sound like you're having a party. And it kind of just lifted the atmosphere, because what also happened was on day 3, the Caldor fire expanded. Lake Tahoe's preparing to evacuate. Like every bad thing that could happen happened during that time. And Red Cross and the Department of Social Services were as tight as anything, and we worked super hard. There was no line of them and us. It was all of us were in it together. And the last thing was, I realise I've left it off here, but this is the water bottle tops. And this is the kind of the funny, silly thing. We were not drinking a lot of water to begin with. And so we made it a bit of a competition. And so who knew that we'd be a competitive bunch? And this was about every time you drank a bottle of water, you kept the water bottle top. And then the person at the end of the day that had the most water bottle tops, like, got the glory of being the water champion. And it was quite funny, but gee, it was so much better for our health. And then we would pull all the bottle tops together for the environmentally conscious people. And then we would reuse those bottle tops the next day if you went and filled your water bottle. But I would say, like, going back to that, the work that we do is all heart, and it's by people, and just use those opportunities, even though it's only 2 weeks, but build relationships with the people that you are deployed with and build that network, because you just never know when you might be working together again. So let's kind of recap networking and relationships. Introductions, day 1, make a really, really good impression, not just because it's you, but because it's the Red Cross and because the work that we do is really special. Remember the platinum rule, work out how everyone likes to be communicated with. Closed loop communication. If anything, this is the most important. Closed loop communication, acknowledge everything. Know your place and support the structure. Lean in whenever you can. And above all, don't take yourself too seriously. have some fun. So I've talked about this really through the lens of being in the SOC or being in an EOC. So let's talk about sharing an experience. I've got Andrew Bogard that's here with me today. He had a wonderful experience in Washington State with the floods that they had up there recently, with Whatcom County, COAD, and Whatcom Strong. So Andrew, if you're here, you want to come and share your story with the group?
Sure, absolutely. Thank
you.
you. So I was deployed to Washington for the floods as the CEP manager, and I was supported by a small but amazing team of folks that went out to the field and kind of gained that visibility of what's going on out there, where should we be, where we may be misaligned with the needs of the community. And one of the things that came back was there was a really large powerhouse organization that kind of grew out of the need, but wasn't really affiliated with anybody. It actually grew out of someone correct me if it's not 501c3, it's 501c4. So they were in blue skies. Prior to the emergency, they were more appropriately, or they were focused on more political activity. And there was a concern, I had a concern that, okay, if we've got this kind of politically aligned group, how are they going to play with our political partners, especially if they're not of the same cloth, or if they're on different ends of the aisle, if you were. So, but man, they're running a UDM site, unsolicited donation management. They're taking in unsolicited donation management. They were essentially running a call center that they had set up. They were entrenched in certain parts of these communities because of the political activities that they did, which meant them well suited to taking these calls and go, hey, these folks have things and these folks need things. Let's combine this. At the same time, the county that they're operating in has a COAD, a community organizations active in disaster group. And that group, when it was initially founded, was essentially an assessment of the community and those partners that we are traditionally familiar with, our faith-based organizations, our community service groups, and they were asked, what could you do? And somebody did the diligent work of collecting all that information, putting it onto a sheet of paper, 3-hole punching it, and putting it in a 3-ring binder, and it sat in the Emergency Operations Center gathering dust. And so there was this misalignment between, you've got the community spinning up and doing the good things, and then you have this other entity who is also attempting to do that. And there was this real concern that are these two groups not going to play well together? And oh my goodness, all those fears were really unfounded. We actually reached out to the COAD director, who was really the only active person, and the EOC had their COAD director at the front desk answering phone calls and letting people into the EOC, and not really being the COAD director. And it wasn't necessarily to anyone's fault per se. This was the first time in a long time they had a disaster this catastrophic, and they were doing the best they could. So no, I'm not going to sit here and armchair quarterback their decisions, but identifying that they had a COAD, like this is an entity that exists, and saying, would you be willing to meet with the leadership from Whatcom Strong? She was all about it. I called out to the members of Whatcom Strong, which we had been working with, and say, hey, Whatcom Strong, we have a client in a shelter who needs this, or has expressed, we have a need for this, or, oh, Whatcom Strong is telling us that they can distribute the cleanup kits out of their DES site that they were running spontaneously, and did an amazing job at it. And so there was a really great relationship between us and Whatcom Strong, and us and the COAD. We were able to sit them down at a literal table. We all had masks, and actually talk through what the COAD was, what the COAD could be. We acknowledged the good work that Whatcom Strong was doing, and asked them if they would be willing to combine their resources and essentially join each other moving forward. And once we Once Whatcom Strong felt heard and were able to provide some constructive criticism, sometimes some unconstructive criticism, remembering that emergent partners, brand new to a disaster, this is their first rodeo, may not exactly know all of some of the nuances that, you know, just some of the hardships that come with disaster response and the chaos that comes with that. It gave the COAD director a chance to express those and was able to put her in a position of being seen as a leader in the community. So getting them together, they ended up, you know, signing the documentation to join the COAD and began to fill in where the COAD needed them in a proactive way. And so it was one of the moments that I really enjoyed from that deployment, where we were able to get a coalition of community partners who aren't traditionally disaster responders, but their hearts are in the right place, aligned with the entity that's supposed to be doing it, but didn't have the bandwidth necessarily to maintain that system in blue skies, and leaving our ego at the door, leaving, you know, assuming that everyone that is meeting in that space is coming with the best of intentions, acknowledging that there is some frustration and there is some chaos that goes along with disaster response. And once we thinned that air, there was a coalition of folks willing to do the hard work as we demobilized the DR and turned things back over to the local chapter. And my hope is that that chapter will now be able to go back to a more robust COAD that has, you know, has integrated partners from this other entity and are sharing resources, information, and still growing. I will own the fact for everyone here that I haven't had a chance to follow up with members of Whatcom Strong or that COAD, and I think that's one of the things that I will hold myself to. When you come off that DR, you need to come off the DR. And for me as a disaster program manager, I have to focus on my local program. But I always kind of wonder in the back of my mind how they're doing. So, but I'll leave it up to the local chapter to do that check-in and do the good work of maintaining that relationship. But yeah, that was a really great moment that I will kind of always keep with me, of getting them all around a literal table together and seeing those relationships form. It's pretty cool.
That's awesome. Thank you, Andrew. Yeah, they are special moments when they have that, well, a special place in your heart forever. So well done. So I'll just kind of wrap up and say, you know, being a good agency partner means you make a difference. We are subject matter experts. You know, if you think back to Luke's presentation, he talked about, you know, we're there to provide shelter, we're there to provide meals, we'll provide feeding. We're there to provide compassion as well and hope. And so making a difference, being those subject matter experts, bringing people around a table, that diplomacy and building trust within our communities, facilitating cooperation between the SOC and the EOC, and then as Andrew has done as well through the wider community. So with that, I will say thank you. Appreciate everyone's attention, and I did get a chance to have a look at some of the comments that came through. So thank you very much, and thanks for your time today. Good to see everyone.
Thank you, Nadine, so much for taking us through networking and relationships from your lens. You did a remarkable job, as I knew you would, because you are such an engaging personality online, but even more so in person. And she did allude to the silliness that sometimes occurs in the State Operations Center. It's absolutely vital to keep us all engaged and working as one team, like she said. So though we may take time for silliness, it's not a waste of time. It's actually vital to how we do business there and how we keep each other motivated and responsible to one another as a team. So after that fantastic presentation, I'm going to take you down into some boring stuff, which is the guts and glory of reporting. It's essential to everything we do, and networking and relationships is no different. So we're going to talk a little bit of the how and the who for reporting. So first, the how is the tools that we're going to use. The first one that we've talked a lot about in the first 4 sessions is the activities log, and it's virtually your diary of what's happening day to day. We're trying to form a work group to create a user-friendly template for that. There's been different variations, but it'd be great if there was a template on hand that we could all reach for if we wanted to use that. The second is our point of contact workbook. So as we're building relationships, as we're networking, we need to document who we're talking to and their contact information and a little bit about what they do. Because as you all know, when we get to a disaster, we're inundated with new faces, new names, an IAP full of different people doing different jobs, and it's difficult to keep track. So use your tools to help you manage that and remember who these folks are, why you're reaching out to them, why you're networking with them. And then the third tool is the mission tracker, because through networking and through relationship building, people are going to come to you as they identify those unmet needs. And that's where we're going to track those unmet needs so that we can be sure they're worked and attended to. So next, who are we going to share this information with? We've gathered the information and the tools. We're going to share it with our external relations team, so they can take advantage of those contacts as well. If the contacts are specific to the location we're working with, we'll ask them to kindly use us as that communication tool. But it's always great for them to know the who that are out there so that they can use you as that networking tool to bring them together and their unmet needs with the agencies that can meet those needs. So again, work through your partners, but share openly with your external relations team. The next who that you're going to share some of the information with, maybe not all, but is your partners at the Emergency Operations Center or the State Operations Center where you're working. A lot of the same partnerships, the people that you're networking with are going to be the same people they're networking with. So use that as an opportunity to make introductions and build further team building experience. The next who you may share this information with, Andrew talked a little bit about the COAD, Community Organizations Active in Disaster, and VOADs, which are Volunteer Organizations Active in Disaster. Again, we're networking, we're relationship building. Those same organizations are going to need to reach out and network with the same organizations we do. So share that information so that we're not duplicating efforts. We're making it simpler and we're that much more effective. And this is how we can bring people together. Red Cross cannot meet every need, but we do like getting to yes. And the way we can get to yes is through our partners. So engage them, share information with them, bring them together, just like Andrew did in Washington. And I was sitting at that table with him, masked, but it truly was a magical experience for me to be able to sit back and watch Andrew do what he does really well. And he did bring those partners together. And I do believe they will have a long-lasting relationship. Unlike Andrew, I have a little bit more difficulty just leaving things alone. And I might reach out to some of our Washington leadership just to see, hey, how's that relationship going? Have you guys been in touch? They were really great partners to work with. So thank you, Andrew, for sharing that remarkable story with me in person and then with this group, because it was vital to the response at that time and to all responses going forward in Whatcom County. And I feel like you made a real impact on the future there. So now we're going to take a little bit of a look at where we've been and then where we're going. So in session 1 was the introduction to this series. We told you what our vision is for this series. And we talked about what you need to know before you go on your assignment. What information and situational awareness should you have in hand before you even go to the airport or get in your car? Session 2, Luke Beckman painted a really perfect picture of disaster response for us and what our goal is and the importance of attitude and approach. In session 3, we covered the nitty-gritty basics of the arrival to the Emergency Operations Center and what we're actually going to do there. And then today, Nadine took us beautifully through networking and relationships, and Andrew shared a great example in real life disaster, how that looks, how bringing community partnerships together can make a real positive impact on the disaster and going forward into future responses. So what's next? Session 5 next week is all going to be about meetings, and we all attend a ton of them, and they're not usually all that exciting, but we're going to talk about specifically what to listen for, what we want to brief out, how we want to represent the Red Cross, and what to share that we gather from those meetings. And again, who do we share that information with? So in the last couple minutes, I'm going to say thank you, Nadine, again. Thank you, Andrew, again. Most of all, thank you to all of you who are joining each week. We have had over 100 participants, which is remarkable. This series is all based on the feedback we receive from you, the questions we receive from you. So please take that few minutes to complete the survey form that we're going to send out to you on Thursday or Friday is usually when it goes out. The couple of days gives us time to compile all the information and the feedback from this session so that we can implement it and follow up in that email with an introduction into our session next week. So again, thank you very much for attending and participating. I'm going to give you back 3 minutes of your day today. We went through it a little bit quicker than normal, and I look forward to seeing you next week when we're digging into meetings. Take care, everyone.